was a boy, the world tried to break me. Orphaned young, the sting of loneliness became a constant companion, quickly followed by the relentless taunts of bullies. Every day felt like a battle just to exist. But something shifted within me, a resolve hardening with each hardship. I learned to stand my ground, to fight back, to channel that raw anger into purpose. I joined the Marines, a crucible where discipline forged strength, and I emerged a different man. Later, I became a deputy, stepping onto the front lines of a different kind of war, a war against the darkness that lurks in the hearts of some. I share these stories not for personal catharsis, but because I believe it is my responsibility, our responsibility, to protect the weak, to shine a light into the darkest corners of human depravity. There are monsters among us, not the fantastical creatures of fiction, but human beings who walk our streets, blend into our communities, and commit acts so vile they defy comprehension. Their stories, often overshadowed by more sensational cases, linger in the forgotten archives of history, lost in the shadows. But they must not remain there. It is vital to unearth these narratives, to remember the victims, and to understand the insidious nature of true evil. This is a journey into the lesser-known annals of horror, a deep dive into the lives of individuals whose names should echo in our collective memory, even if they never quite reached the mainstream consciousness. We begin with a man who cultivated a facade of normalcy, his sinister deeds hidden behind the comforting scent of freshly baked goods. This seemingly ordinary figure was Robert Hansen, a man who earned the chilling moniker the Butcher Baker. His life was split between the mundane and the monstrous. By day, he was a mild-mannered baker in Anchorage, Alaska, known for his pastries and unassuming demeanor. He was a pillar of his local community, a seemingly harmless presence. But when night fell, or when his dark impulses took hold, he transformed into something truly terrifying. Hansen had a perverse method for selecting and tormenting his victims. He would target vulnerable women, often sex workers or dancers, luring them with false promises or even, in some cases, outright abduction. His preferred hunting ground was the vast, unforgiving Alaskan wilderness. He possessed a small plane, a seemingly innocent hobby, which he would use to fly his unsuspecting captives deep into these remote, isolated areas. Once there, the facade dropped, and the hunt began. He would release these women into the dense, frozen landscape, then stalk them, pursuing them as if they were nothing more than wild game. This horrifying ritual, a twisted echo of a hunter's pursuit, played out repeatedly in the desolate beauty of Alaska. Over the span of several years, Robert Hansen was responsible for the deaths of at least 17 women. Each abduction, each flight into the wilderness, each hunt, contributed to his macabre tally. The sheer scale of his crimes, carried out in such a vast and sparsely populated region, allowed him to evade capture for a considerable period. His victims' disappearances often went unnoticed for extended periods, or were attributed to the transient nature of their lives. But eventually, a survivor, a courageous young woman who managed to escape his clutches, provided crucial information that led to his apprehension. Hansen was convicted of his heinous crimes, and he spent the remainder of his days in prison, dying there in 2014. His story serves as a chilling reminder that evil can wear the most innocuous disguises, lurking just beneath the surface of everyday life. From the desolate Alaskan wilderness, our grim journey takes us south, into the heart of America, where another predator roamed with terrifying impunity. This was a man whose brutality defied all reason, a phantom figure leaving a trail of shattered lives in his wake. His name was Carl Eugene Watts, but to those who eventually came to know of his horrific spree, he was the Sunday morning slasher. This chilling moniker was earned from his frequent pattern of attacking women during the quiet hours of Sunday mornings, a time when many were still asleep or preparing for a day of rest and peace. Watts's reign of terror spanned 2 states, leaving a chilling imprint across Texas and Michigan throughout the 1970s and early 1980s. Watts possessed an almost mundane appearance, making his capacity for such heinous acts even more disturbing. He wasn't overtly menacing, allowing him to blend seamlessly into urban landscapes, choosing his victims with a cold, calculated precision. His attacks were characterized by extreme violence and a complete disregard for human life. He often stalked his victims, sometimes for hours, before striking with sudden, overwhelming force. The methods varied, but the outcome was consistently brutal, leaving behind a trail of terror and grief. He derived a perverse satisfaction from the power he wielded over his victims, their fear fueling his monstrous impulses. The police in both states grappled with a series of unsolved murders and assaults, recognizing a pattern of brutality but struggling to connect the dots to a single, elusive perpetrator. The sheer geographical spread of his crimes, combined with his transient nature and lack of obvious connections to his victims, made him incredibly difficult to apprehend. While officially convicted of a handful of murders, the true scope of Carl Eugene Watts's depravity is far, far greater. Investigators and cold case detectives, working tirelessly over decades, came to believe he was responsible for the murders of over 100 women. This staggering number places him among the most prolific serial killers in American history, yet his name often remains absent from the popular discourse surrounding such figures. The true count may never be definitively known, as many of his victims' cases remain unsolved, and the evidence tying him to them is largely circumstantial or based on his own unreliable admissions. Some of his alleged victims were found in remote areas, their bodies often severely decomposed, making identification and forensic analysis incredibly challenging. Others simply vanished, their disappearances never officially linked to Watts despite strong suspicions. Watts continued his horrific spree for years, slipping through the cracks of justice until a survivor's bravery ultimately led to his capture. He was eventually apprehended after one of his victims managed to escape and identify him, leading to his conviction for a few select murders. Despite the overwhelming evidence and the strong belief that he was responsible for a far greater number of deaths, the legal system could only convict him on the cases for which there was irrefutable proof. Watts spent the remainder of his life in prison, a silent testament to the countless lives he destroyed. He died in 2007 from prostate cancer, taking the full, horrifying truth of his countless victims to his grave. His story serves as a chilling reminder of the silent epidemics of violence that can plague communities, leaving behind enduring scars that time can never fully heal, and a stark warning that statistical certainty often lags far behind the grim reality of a predator at large. The shadow he cast over Texas and Michigan during those terrifying years still lingers, a testament to the lives extinguished and the questions that may forever remain unanswered. Our journey into the darkest corners of human depravity now crosses continents, taking us to the lush, yet terrifying, landscapes of South America. Here, we confront a monster whose name is whispered with a mixture of fear and profound sorrow, a man whose crimes targeted the most innocent among us. This was Pedro Lopez, a name that should echo with infamy, known chillingly as the Monster of the Andes. His horrific reign of terror unfolded across multiple nations, casting a long, dark shadow over Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru during the late 20th century. Lopez's modus operandi was as disturbing as his sheer prolificacy. He targeted young girls, often from impoverished or marginalized communities, making them incredibly vulnerable to his insidious charm and deceptive tactics. He would lure them away from markets, bus stations, or remote villages, exploiting their innocence and trust with promises of sweets, toys, or help for their families. Once he had them isolated, the nightmare would begin. His attacks were brutal, sexually violent, and ultimately fatal, leaving behind a trail of grief that devastated countless families and communities. The sheer scale of his crimes was, for a long time, unimaginable to authorities in these regions, who struggled to comprehend the disappearance of so many children, often attributing them to runaways or other, less sinister causes. The true horror of Pedro Lopez's crimes came to light in a series of chilling confessions. After his eventual arrest in Ecuador, prompted by the discovery of mass graves, Lopez began to systematically detail his atrocities. With a terrifyingly calm demeanor, he confessed to killing an almost incomprehensible number of children, over 300 young girls. This admission, initially met with disbelief by authorities, was slowly corroborated by the grim discovery of burial sites across the Andean region. He led investigators to numerous clandestine graves, often in remote, unmarked areas, where the remains of his tiny victims were uncovered, one after another. This staggering number, once confirmed, cemented his place as one of the most prolific serial killers in recorded history, a figure whose depravity almost defies human understanding. The revelations surrounding Lopez's life were equally disturbing. He himself was a product of severe abuse and neglect, a pattern that tragically often feeds into the creation of such monsters. He claimed his first murder occurred at the age of 8, setting him on a dark path that would eventually claim hundreds of lives. His methods were meticulous, almost ritualistic in their execution. He often used strangulation, ensuring a silent and terrifying end for his young victims. He was a chameleon, able to blend into various communities, move across national borders with relative ease, and exploit the systemic vulnerabilities that left countless children unprotected. The sheer geographic scope of his killings, coupled with the transient nature of his victims, allowed him to operate undetected for years, preying on the most helpless members of society. The horror of his confession sent shockwaves across the globe, forcing a grim reckoning with the depths of human evil. Yet, the story of Pedro Lopez takes another deeply unsettling turn after his arrest. Despite confessing to hundreds of murders and providing detailed accounts of his crimes, he was not sentenced to a lifetime of incarceration, nor was he executed. Due to an appalling confluence of legal loopholes, mental health assessments that deemed him cured after a relatively short period of detention, and the complexities of the justice systems in the countries where he operated, Pedro Lopez was actually released from prison. After serving only a limited sentence for some of his convicted crimes, he was deemed fit to re-enter society. His release triggered international outrage and profound fear, especially among the communities he had terrorized. The last confirmed reports of his whereabouts are murky, shrouded in rumor and uncertainty, leaving a terrifying void. His current location remains unknown, a chilling fact that casts a perpetual shadow of dread. The monster of the Andes, a man responsible for the slaughter of hundreds of innocent children, walks free, or at least his freedom cannot be definitively denied. This unresolved conclusion to his monstrous narrative serves as a stark, horrifying reminder of how legal systems can sometimes fail catastrophically, allowing unimaginable evil to potentially resurface. The haunting question lingers. Where is Pedro Lopez now, and could he ever prey again? Our journey through the abyss of human cruelty now leads us to the mystical and densely populated archipelago of Indonesia, where a killer emerged from the shadows, driven not by conventional motives, but by a chilling, ancient belief twisted into a monstrous ritual. This was Ahmad Siraji, a supposed shaman whose dark spiritual quest led him to become a serial murderer on an unimaginable scale. His story is a terrifying blend of superstition, perversion, and cold-blooded murder. Siraji, a cattle breeder by trade, cultivated a reputation in his village as a powerful black magic sorcerer. People from surrounding areas sought his counsel for various ailments and misfortunes, believing he held the key to spiritual power and earthly success. It was this veneer of spiritual authority that allowed him to lure his victims into his deadly trap. His twisted ideology was born from a perverse interpretation of local folklore and a personal revelation. He claimed that a dream or a spiritual vision had instructed him that if he were to murder women and drink their saliva, he would gain immense mystical power and become an even greater sorcerer. This grotesque ritual, he believed, would imbue him with supernatural abilities, making him invulnerable and all-knowing. It was a macabre quest for power, fueled by unspeakable acts. Over the course of more than a decade, from 1986 to 1997, Ahmad Siraji systematically enacted his horrifying ritual. He lured women, mostly young women and teenagers seeking his magical services, to his home with promises of wealth, beauty, or solutions to their problems. Once they were isolated and vulnerable, the facade of the benevolent shaman dissolved. He would strangle them, often using their own sarongs as ligatures, a final act of desecration. Following their deaths, he would perform his bizarre ritual, drinking their saliva, convinced it was the conduit for the power he craved. The final, chilling step in his process was the disposal of the bodies. He buried them, fully clothed, in a sugarcane field near his home, positioning them strategically with their heads pointing towards his house. This unusual burial practice, he believed, would further enhance his magical potency and prevent the spirits of his victims from returning to haunt him. The vast, sprawling sugarcane fields provided the perfect, silent graveyard for his victims, obscuring the evidence of his ever-growing number of atrocities. The sheer scale of his depravity was finally revealed in 1997, when the villagers discovered the decomposing body of a young woman buried in the sugarcane field. Her family, having reported her missing after she sought Suraji's spiritual guidance, immediately suspected the shaman. When police investigated, they found not one, but multiple graves. The initial discovery led to a painstaking excavation of the entire field, uncovering more and more bodies with each passing day. The total number of victims unearthed was a staggering 42 women, each one a testament to his gruesome ritual and the blind faith he exploited. The discovery sent shockwaves across Indonesia, turning the local community's admiration for the shaman into profound horror and disbelief. The subsequent investigation revealed that Suraji had help in his horrific endeavors. His 3 wives, including his sister, were implicated in varying degrees, either assisting him in luring victims, burying bodies, or covering up his crimes. This family-wide complicity added another layer of depravity to an already monstrous tale. The trial of Ahmad Suraji captivated the nation. The details of his ritualistic killings, his chilling confession, and the sheer number of victims shocked the public conscience. Despite his claims of spiritual motivation, the court saw only cold-blooded murder. He was found guilty of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to death. In 2008, Ahmad Suraji, the so-called shaman, who sought power through the consumption of human essence, was executed by firing squad, bringing a definitive end to his reign of terror. His story remains a stark warning against the dangers of unchecked superstition and the depths to which a twisted belief system can plunge a human soul, leaving behind a legacy of terror etched into the very soil where his victims lay buried. The sugarcane field, once a symbol of livelihood, became an eternal memorial to the horrifying ritual of death. Our journey through the dark history of unseen monsters now takes us to post-World War II Japan, a nation grappling with immense hardship and societal upheaval. In this desperate era, where life was fragile and resources scarce, a different kind of horror emerged, cloaked not in brute force or mystical rituals, but in the guise of compassion and necessity. This was the chilling story of Miyuki Ishikawa, a seemingly ordinary midwife who became an angel of death, preying on the most vulnerable members of society, newborn infants. Ishikawa worked at the Kotobuki Maternity Hospital in Tokyo, a city scarred by war and struggling with the aftermath. The immediate post-war period in Japan was characterized by extreme poverty, lack of proper infrastructure, and widespread social disruption. Families faced immense economic pressure, and many found themselves unable to provide for their children, especially if they had multiple offspring or if the child was born out of wedlock. Infanticide, though illegal, was a grim reality in some desperate corners, often driven by the crushing weight of poverty and societal stigma. Miyuki Ishikawa exploited this desperation, seeing not vulnerable lives to be protected, but an opportunity for profit and a twisted solution to what she perceived as a societal burden. Her method was insidiously simple, yet utterly brutal in its outcome: deliberate neglect. As a trained midwife, she held a position of trust and responsibility, entrusted with the care of fragile new lives. However, instead of providing the necessary care and nourishment, she would intentionally allow babies to sicken and die from starvation, exposure, or lack of proper medical attention. She would then present these deaths as unfortunate, unavoidable tragedies, often citing the poor economic conditions or the inherent weakness of the infants. Parents, often relieved of what they saw as an insurmountable burden, would sometimes even pay her for her services, believing she was helping them navigate an impossible situation, or perhaps, in some cases, implicitly understanding the unspoken arrangement. Her actions were driven by a cold, pragmatic calculation: reduce the number of mouths to feed and profit from the tragic circumstances. The scale of her horrific enterprise was truly staggering. While the exact number of victims remains debated due to the circumstances of the time and the nature of her crimes, Miyuki Ishikawa is believed to be responsible for the deaths of up to 100 infant deaths. Some estimates even place the number higher, suggesting it could be closer to 169. Each tiny life extinguished was a silent testament to her depravity, a profound betrayal of her professional oath and fundamental human decency. She was not working alone. Her husband, Takashi Ishikawa, was aware of her activities and helped her dispose of the bodies, further profiting from the grim trade. Several doctors at the Kotobuki Maternity Hospital were also implicated, either by complicity, turning a blind eye to the suspicious deaths, or by actively participating in issuing false death certificates to conceal the true cause of demise. This network of complicity allowed her horrific actions to continue unchecked for an extended period. The Kotobuki Maternity Hospital incident, as it came to be known, was eventually brought to light when 2 of the infant victims were discovered. The police investigation slowly unraveled the horrifying truth, exposing Ishikawa's systematic killings and the complicity of those around her. The public was stunned by the revelations, grappling with the sheer depravity of a midwife murdering the very infants she was sworn to protect. However, the legal fallout for Miyuki Ishikawa and her accomplices was surprisingly lenient, a fact that remains a source of considerable controversy. Due to the legal complexities of post-war Japan, particularly regarding infanticide which, while illegal, was sometimes viewed with a degree of societal understanding given the era's hardships, Ishikawa was not charged with murder for all her victims. Instead, she and her husband were charged with multiple counts of professional negligence resulting in death. This distinction, rooted in the prevailing legal interpretations of the time, meant that their punishments were far less severe than what might be expected for such widespread atrocities today. Miyuki Ishikawa served only a short prison sentence, a mere 4 years. Her husband received an even shorter term. The doctors involved also received relatively light sentences or fines. This outcome, largely attributed to legal loopholes and the societal context of the time, left many bewildered and outraged. The Angel of Death walked free after a tragically brief period of incarceration, leaving behind a legacy of extinguished infant lives and a haunting question about justice in times of extreme duress. Miyuki Ishikawa's story is a profound reminder that monsters do not always appear with bloodthirsty rage. Sometimes, they operate with a chilling, calculated pragmatism, exploiting the most desperate circumstances to commit unimaginable evil. Her case stands as a chilling historical footnote, a grim testament to how societal pressures can warp morality and how vulnerable lives can be tragically undervalued. Our grim exploration of history's most terrifying, yet often forgotten serial killers now brings us to a figure whose depravity reached truly unprecedented depths, a man whose name, when spoken, sends shivers down the spine of an entire nation. This was Luis Garavito, a monster so prolific, so utterly devoid of humanity, that he earned the chilling moniker La Bestia, the Beast. His reign of terror cast a dark, indelible stain across Colombia during the 1990s, leaving a legacy of pain and an almost unimaginable number of victims. Garavito was a master of deception, a chameleon who exploited the very fabric of society to ensnare his prey. He often posed as a street vendor, a beggar, a monk, or even a charity worker, adopting personas that evoked pity, trust, or authority. This allowed him to approach his targets without suspicion. His preferred victims were the most defenseless: young boys, often street children, orphans, or those from impoverished families, who were already living on the fringes of society. He knew these children were less likely to be missed immediately, and their disappearances less likely to be thoroughly investigated. He would lure them with promises of food, clothing, money, or even simply a kind word, drawing them away from crowded streets into isolated areas. Once he had a child isolated, Garavito's true nature would emerge. His attacks were characterized by unspeakable brutality, involving sexual assault, torture, and ultimately murder. He buried many of his victims in shallow, unmarked graves across the vast and varied landscape of Colombia, in fields, alongside roads, in remote forests. The sheer number of child disappearances during the 1990s in Colombia was staggering, often attributed to the widespread social unrest and armed conflict plaguing the country at the time. No one suspected that a single individual was responsible for such a horrifying proportion of these vanishing acts. Garavito moved constantly, shifting between different cities and regions, meticulously avoiding detection, leaving a fragmented trail that confounded authorities for years. He possessed a chilling self-awareness of his actions, even keeping detailed notebooks of his victims, meticulously recording their names and the dates of their deaths, a macabre diary of his atrocities. The hunt for Garavito was largely accidental. His eventual capture in 1999 stemmed not from a direct investigation into the child disappearances, but from an unrelated attempted kidnapping. Once apprehended and interrogated, the depth of his crimes began to unravel. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Garavito began to recount his horrific tally. What followed was a series of chilling confessions that stunned investigators and shocked the world. With an unnerving calmness, he confessed to the rape and murder of over 100 young boys. As investigators verified his claims, leading them to numerous mass graves across Colombia, the number continued to climb, far exceeding what anyone had ever imagined. His initial confession eventually reaching over 190 confirmed victims, with strong suspicions that the true number could be significantly higher, potentially exceeding 200. This places Luis Garavito among the most prolific serial killers in documented history, arguably the most prolific in terms of confirmed victims. His trial was a harrowing ordeal for the nation. The details of his atrocities, recounted by him with disturbing clarity, painted a picture of unimaginable evil. Given the unprecedented scale of his crimes, one would expect a sentence commensurate with such depravity. And indeed, Luis Garavito was sentenced to 1,853 years in prison. This colossal sentence was a reflection of the hundreds of counts of murder and sexual assault for which he was convicted. However, due to an archaic and deeply flawed provision in Colombian sentencing laws at the time, which aimed to encourage confessions by offering sentence reductions, Garavito's effective prison time was dramatically reduced. Under these laws, the maximum time an individual could serve in prison, regardless of the number of convictions, was significantly capped. This meant that despite being sentenced to millennia behind bars, his actual time served could be as little as 20 to 30 years. The horrifying truth is that Luis Garavito may now be eligible for release or could become eligible in the very near future. A chilling prospect that reminds us that true justice sometimes remains elusive, and the shadows of evil can stretch far beyond the confines of a prison cell. From the chilling uncertainty surrounding the beast, we now turn to the explosive brutality of a different kind of monster, one who brought a reign of terror to an entirely different part of the world. His name would become synonymous with ruthless efficiency and widespread slaughter, a man who became known as the Monster Killer. This was Yang Xinhai, a figure who emerged from rural China in the early 2000s to embark on a killing spree of almost unparalleled ferocity. Unlike some serial killers who target specific demographics or adhere to complex rituals, Yang Xinhai's approach was shockingly straightforward and utterly ruthless. He simply murdered, with an almost machine-like efficiency, driven by a twisted desire for revenge against a society he felt had wronged him. His targets were not specific individuals he knew, but rather entire, unsuspecting households. He would often arrive late at night, breaking into homes in remote villages, using simple, brutal tools to achieve his aims. His weapons of choice were often a hammer or an axe, tools that speak to the raw, visceral nature of his attacks. He bypassed subtlety for sheer, overwhelming force, leaving behind scenes of unimaginable carnage. Between 2001 and 2003, Yang Xinhai murdered an astonishing 67 people. His method was terrifyingly consistent. He would break into homes, often in the dead of night, and systematically slaughter every single occupant. Men, women, and even children. No one was spared his brutal onslaught. He extinguished entire families in their sleep, leaving behind scenes of unspeakable horror that traumatized the small, tight-knit communities he targeted. The sheer number of victims, and the consistency of his method, eventually alerted Chinese authorities to the presence of a single, highly dangerous perpetrator. Yang Xinhai's reign of terror finally came to an end in 2003 when he was apprehended during a routine police check. He confessed to his extensive crimes with a chilling lack of emotion. He was swiftly put on trial, and in 2004, Yang Xinhai was executed, bringing a definitive and swift end to the reign of one of the most prolific and brutal serial killers of the 21st century. The hammer and the axe became symbols of the terrifying efficiency of a killer who simply wanted to erase anyone in his path. Finally, we journey to the cold, oppressive climate of the Soviet Union, where fear and paranoia were already pervasive, providing fertile ground for a monster to operate in the shadows. This was Andrei Chikatilo, a man whose grotesque appetite for violence earned him the infamous title, the Butcher of Rostov. His crimes were particularly chilling because they targeted the most vulnerable members of Soviet society, and his ability to evade capture for so long exposed deep flaws within a system that prided itself on control and order. Chikatilo lived a seemingly unremarkable life as a schoolteacher and supply clerk, a bland facade that masked an unspeakable inner world. He was a married man with children, a seemingly normal citizen in a highly surveilled state. His targets were diverse in age but consistent in their vulnerability. Primarily women and children, whom he would lure with promises of candy, a job, or simply by exploiting their trust in adults. He often stalked bus stops, train stations, and remote forest paths, seeking out unsuspecting individuals. His methods were unspeakably brutal. After luring his victims to secluded locations, he would commit horrific acts of sexual assault, mutilation, and murder, often using knives. The secrecy of the Soviet system, coupled with bureaucratic incompetence and a reluctance to admit to the existence of serial killers, inadvertently provided him with an extended period of operational freedom. Between 1978 and 1990, Andrei Chikatilo committed at least 52 murders. This horrifying tally made him one of the most prolific and feared serial killers in Soviet history. As the body count grew, and the gruesome similarities between the cases became undeniable, authorities were finally forced to acknowledge the presence of a single, monstrous perpetrator. Chikatilo was finally apprehended in November 1990, and after a prolonged period of interrogation, he confessed to his crimes. His trial, which began in 1992, became a sensational public spectacle. The Butcher of Rostov was convicted of 52 murders. In 1994, Andrei Chikatilo was executed, ending the life of a man whose brutal acts had shattered the illusion of safety and exposed the monstrous capacity for evil hidden within seemingly ordinary individuals. This chilling collection of stories serves as a potent, heavy reminder that true monsters do not always conform to our preconceived notions. They are not mythical creatures lurking in the shadows of folklore, but human beings who breathe the same air, walk the same paths, and seamlessly blend into society. They can be the mild-mannered baker, the unassuming laborer, the trusted midwife, or the seemingly innocuous beggar. They hide in plain sight, their dark intentions concealed behind a veneer of normalcy, preying on the most vulnerable among us, the innocent, the desperate, the marginalized, those who are least equipped to defend themselves. My mission, in recounting these grim histories, is clear: to expose them so they are never forgotten. The victims, whose lives were brutally cut short, deserve to have their stories told, their memory honored. Their pain, their terror, must not simply fade into the annals of forgotten statistics. By bringing these narratives to light, we not only pay tribute to those who suffered, but we also arm ourselves with knowledge. We are urged to stay alert, to recognize that the greatest threats often come from the most unexpected places. The chilling question always remains: how well do we truly know those around us? This is a plea, a stark imperative, for viewers to remain vigilant, to trust their instincts, and to honor the victims by remembering their stories, ensuring that the shadows of evil, even when cast by seemingly ordinary people, are never truly allowed to consume the light of remembrance. The vigilance of memory is our greatest defense against the monsters who walk among us.
Thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more.